All right. Well, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. We're going to get started. I'm sure folks will be joining us in the next couple of minutes as well. We are so excited to bring you together leaders from different parts of the sector who are really pushing the envelope on family engagement strategies to drive equity in our schools. We want to get you connected, so please drop your name and organization in the chat and adjust your Zoom to include the same if possible. We also invite folks to be on camera if that's possible, especially for the small group discussions. We are recording the whole group sessions and we'll share it with those that registered for you to share with colleagues who couldn't make it today. This is very much meant to be a conversation, so please keep your questions, your reflections, your amens, and of course your good pushes in the chat throughout. And for those of you who don't know Learning Heroes, just a bit about us, our nationally representative research is the anchor of our work, and we strive to make it really actionable for the field, especially as we work closely alongside our partners to strengthen our collective efforts. That's why days like today are so exciting to us. The research really uplifts parent, teacher, and principal mindsets and priorities related to their child's education and the homeschool relationship. You should have all received our new report that we are publicly releasing tomorrow. It offers concrete steps and examples to help districts design more effective and equitable family engagement strategies. Today, we have an incredible lineup of folks leading the way in this work that we are truly humbled by, so thank you for joining us. We're going to begin with a conversation to frame the question isn't whether to do family engagement, but how. We'll then jump into small group discussions to engage with each other and with school and district leaders featured in the report. From there, we have a dynamite parent leadership panel with 2 leaders who are mobilizing change at the local level and really informing the national dialogue. And stick around with us till the end. We'll then wrap it up with a funder panel and a closing panel and a preview of what's to come, sorry. So before we jump into the agenda, we all know that relationships are at the heart of good family engagement work. They also make the world go round, right? So we want to help you connect with someone new today and begin with a much needed dose of optimism. So we're going to ask you to reflect on one of 2 questions, either what's giving you hope right now, or from your lens, what is the promise of family engagement? This is a really quick get to know you, 2 minutes. So just introduce yourself and answer one of the questions. It's up to you. We'll be split up randomly. So let's open up the rooms and we'll be back together in a moment. All right. Thank you all so much for sharing with each other. We really hope that you will get connected with at least one new person today. It is now my privilege to introduce mi colega, who I'm so glad joined Learning Heroes last year, Dr. Eyal Bergman.
Hola, Wendy.
Hola. El día está aquí.
Acá estamos.
So, Eyal, you have written a new report called Unlocking the How, Designing Family Engagement Strategies that Lead to School Success. Can you tell us a bit about it and how it frames today's conversation?
Yeah, I mean, we call it Unlocking the How because we just keep hearing from schools and districts that the pandemic has raised their awareness on the importance of family and community engagement. And they're asking for guidance on how to do it well. So we thought we would do our best to provide some of that guidance and some recommendations. And we pull on 3 primary sources to pull together the recommendations. The first is Learning Heroes, 6 years of Learning Heroes nationally representative surveys with parents, with teachers, and with school principals. We've learned a lot about the nature of the homeschool relationship from asking folks about it. And then the second is the dual capacity building framework for family school partnerships, which many folks on this call will be familiar with. It really synthesizes more than 50 years of research on what we know works in this field of family and community engagement in schools. And the third is a report that I co-authored with Dr. Karen Mapp last year. It was published by the Carnegie Corporation of New York. It's a report called Embracing a New Normal Toward a More Liberatory Approach to Family Engagement. And that really takes stock of this current moment in this moment of dual pandemics to offer some high-level recommendations for systems leaders that really want to invest in this work. So unlocking the how takes a little bit more of a granular approach, a little bit more of, what can you do on Monday morning to elevate family engagement? And what gets me most excited about the report is the dozen or so examples we have from schools and districts that are leading the way. We're actually going to hear from some of those folks later today. And what they do and the way we frame it in the report is that they really bring to life what we call for in the report, which are, again, three main pillars of a comprehensive, effective family engagement strategy. Focus on building, and in many cases, having to restore trust and teamwork between home and school. The second is a focus on student learning and well-being within the home-school relationship. A lot of what we see in family engagement efforts in schools do not necessarily touch exactly on what students are learning. And the third is to build infrastructure for this work, the systems, the structures. We think of it as a scaffolding for adults in the system to learn over time what's working and how to really drive better improvement for family engagement in schools. So hopefully that gives a good round out.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm especially excited to hear from the local leaders and from some of our partners, as at the end of the day, we just want this to be really practical, right, for districts and schools as they are facing so much. So before I turn it back over to you to introduce our first panel, we are going to share a short video that provides a window into the kind of culture that embodies the three pillars that Eyal just talked about. And we are grateful to our friends at Walter P. Carter School in Baltimore.
Families and educators alike value teamwork, grounded in trusting relationships between home and school.
I use two words a lot with my parents: teamwork and patience. Teamwork because we have to work together. I tell my parents to be patient with me because I'm still trying to catch our students up to their level. I also tell parents, be patient with your student because they're trying, they're giving their best. They give their best to me and they try to give their best to their parents. And I tell their parents to be patient with themselves because some of my parents get frustrated. I don't know why they can't do addition or subtraction. It takes time.
I am very comfortable of my son being here because I know that he's in good hands.
While parents and educators team up, there remains a disconnect between what parents think and teachers know about student performance. More than 9 in 10 parents believe their child is at or above grade level, while only 44% of teachers say most of their students are prepared for grade level work.
Sometimes parents have a unrealistic perception of their scholar and their academics, and that's no fault to them. Sometimes we have to take ownership on the school level of how we communicate academics to parents, how we communicate standards to parents. I've been at this school for about 4 years, so my second year here, we sent home the assessment results, and a parent called and said, "You sent home this assessment, I don't know what this is." And I'm like, we did not explain to parents like how to read this assessment report.
Both parents and educators agree that families having a clear picture of student achievement is a top priority, and trust and teamwork describe the connection they would like to have between home and school.
Not doing it like once a month, not doing it like every 2 months, but doing it consistent where the parents feel that the school care about them, that the school is invested in their child, the school is invested in the livelihood of families.
So one thing I always do is make sure that parents know they see me and I'm visible, and teachers also see that I'm communicating with parents and I know them by name. So teachers see me calling parents by name, they see me calling students by name.
Educators and families deserve systems that prioritize trust and teamwork. What does that look like for your community?
Welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that video. That video is being released tomorrow, and you're welcome to use that video and see that video on our YouTube channel. I'm going to introduce our opening panel in just a moment. We're going to hear first from Dr. Karen Mapp, and then we'll bring in Dr. Tom Kane, and then we'll also hear from Tina Hyde-Hubbard from Baltimore City Public Schools. But before we do, I'd like to open up the chat. If you'd like to share your reactions to what you learned from the video, what you appreciate from the video, would love to hear what reactions folks have to the video. I know that for me, there's a real moment to me where Principal Pinkney realizes that they've been sharing information with families, but not actually engaging in a dialogue with families. And that to me is a really special moment in the video, because it's like a window into this reality that schools are not necessarily oriented to this authentic two-way conversation with families, but it's also a window into a leader saying, you know, we can do better, and that actually we need to do better. And it seems to me that a lot more folks, because of the pandemic, are starting to ask this question: how do we do this work? And how do we do this work at scale? And in my mind, there's no better person to ask this question to than Dr. Karen Mapp, who we're going to bring to join us. Dr. Mapp has spent her career studying the nature of the homeschool relationship, helping all of us understand the nature of the homeschool relationship. She's on the faculty of the Harvard Graduate School of Education. She's been a teacher and a mentor to me and to many of us on this call. So Dr. Mapp, welcome, and thank you for being with us.
It's great to be here. I was just trying to put a little message in the chat saying, I see a lot of our family engagement family here today, a lot of friends. Hi, everybody. Good to see you. I feel like, what was the show where the person, I don't know if it was Mr. Rogers, and he pretended to see people and he would call you out by name. It's like, hey, Ron, hey, Ann.
Hey, Ron.
Yeah. You know, hi, Sade. I mean, I see a whole lot of folks that could be on here forever saying, hi, Helen. A lot of folks I know, and we're all a part of this great family that's trying to push this work forward. So it's great to see everybody.
Yes, thank you for that. It's a friends and family, and you're making new friends and family if you don't know everybody on this call. So Dr. Mapp, I want to start with an opening question. We've known for a long time what works in family and community engagement. The pandemic has helped a lot of folks realize it, but you know, the seminal research on trust comes from the 90s at this point. You have written a lot of case studies. Many of us have written case studies that point a direct line between a focus on student learning and development in the family engagement work leading to improved student outcomes. The infrastructure we call for, that comes right out of the dual capacity building framework. So we've known what works in family engagement for some time now. And one of the things that I really admire about you and that I appreciate about you is that you're not afraid to share what you're learning or how your views have evolved. And so to that end, I would like to ask you, and I think a lot of us would like to hear your reflections on what the pandemics have taught you. What have you learned about family engagement from this era?
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. And, you know, Ayal, you and I talk all the time. So we've been on this journey together. And, you know, one of the things that I learned when I came to Harvard as a doctoral student was, particularly from Professor Gary Orfield, was that it's really important for faculty to give our students an opportunity to do work alongside us and to publish. And he was really good about that. And so when I became a faculty member at the Ed School, I tried to carry on that tradition, just as a lot of my colleagues do. So with, you know, Paul Kuttner and Mark and I, Warren, with all the students that were involved in the Match on Dry Grass project, and then with the revision of the dual capacity version building framework version 2, I saw your interest in this work, and so was excited to partner with you on that publication and then on the Carnegie piece. And I suspect we'll be doing more work together in the future.
I was excited to partner with you too.
So what have I learned? So a couple of things. First of all, when the pandemic started in March of 2020, a lot of us started to get emails and texts and calls from people in the field, basically saying, now what? What are we going to do now? And, we know, and some of those folks are here today, a lot of people who've done this work well for many, many years. I've learned from them, a lot of their practice knowledge was built into both the first framework and the second about what works. So I started to call them, and Scholastic was very gracious in allowing me to do a webinar series in the summer of 2020, where we had practitioners come on and start to talk to us. And these were people who, again, had been very skilled in the practice of engaging families. And so we wanted them to speak to people about, what do we think you need to be doing now? Mm-hmm. And I learned a lot from those conversations. One thing that I learned was that it was so clear then that, and now, that relationships are key. So this whole piece that we focus on in the framework and in our piece that we wrote for Carnegie about relationships mattering, and Eyal, you know this, and I'll say it to the world, I would love to see some research where we could really look at what difference those relationships made during COVID. So, because I'm hearing stories over and over and over again about how our schools, our programs, our organizations that had prioritized intentional relationship building before the pandemic actually really saw that the pivots that they had to make during the pandemic, whether it was, virtual, hybrid, whatever, were much easier. Families already knew, because they were linked to learning, they were able to really partner with teachers, from the moment they had to go online. They were willing to do that. They weren't scrambling. The teachers and the organizations weren't scrambling to find families' phone numbers and addresses, because they already had that. So in so many ways, I heard stories about how these places that had prioritized relationship building with families, seeing families as partners, already doing co-design work with families, found the pivot much easier. I would like to see whether or not those were also places, because I am hearing this anecdotally, that also have seen, less than expected learning loss. Their attendance rates were much better during the COVID period. So I'm really interested in learning more about how, again, we know that family engagement matters. And I think I'm hearing more about how that matters now. So now I do want to say personally, what I learned from the pandemic was that I'm done playing around with the language around family engagement practice. I've tried to be, diplomatic and tried to use language that people maybe didn't, make people feel a little uncomfortable. Done with that. We're done with that.
This is
right. So now this is where the whole language that we wrote in our paper about family engagement, now the practice has to be, solidarity driven, equity focused, and then that word that kind of shook everybody, liberatory. Okay. Without hierarchy. So that's sort of, both what I learned about myself is it's time to just double click on what we mean when it comes to effective partnerships. And then again, hearing all of the outcomes from those partnerships that people had already established.
Yeah, and we're gonna hear from Tina in just a moment about, and Tina, I'm gonna ask you if you could speak to there's a lot of schools in Baltimore, over 160 schools. So there is a lot of variability naturally in any system like that. So to hear about those schools like Walter P. Carter, Brandon Pinckney's school that had already invested in family engagement as a strategy before the pandemic, what did you notice about how they were able to withstand the storm of the pandemic when it arrived? Can we talk a little bit more about what we mean by liberatory family engagement, Dr. Matt? Because one of the things that we do in the report is that we go a lot deeper on the nature of the challenge in family that we see in family engagement. So we say that families, it's not just that educators haven't been trained, although they haven't been trained, but that reflects a broader set of priorities, right? We don't train people on things that we don't think is a priority because we have limited bandwidth. So families are treated as spectators to the work of schools. So, oh, they can't come, they won't come. There's a lot of deficit-based language out there. We don't necessarily lift up family wisdom and cultural expertise. I mean, I use this example all the time. I come from a Latino immigrant family. I was really lucky to grow up in a bilingual home, but a lot of my fellow Latinos, they grew up in homes where their parents were told not to speak to them in Spanish. And so they feel a sense of shame, so they don't talk to their kids in Spanish. And then the kids grow up years later, don't speak Spanish, and feel also a sense of shame for not being able to speak their mother language. Schools have a really important role in upholding and honoring and valuing cultural wisdom. And then a lot of the work that we do in family, and I'm guilty of this too, the family engagement efforts that we see a lot of times in school districts is around an assimilation function where we as the schools are the keepers of the information. We know what your kids need in order to succeed in school. So we ask you to come to us, but there's not as much of a deep groundswell to like really understand where families are and start from that point. So we go a lot deeper into the nature of the challenge, and we talk about caste, Isabel Wilkerson's notion of caste and how that is reflected in schools. And that's where the liberatory language comes from. Could you talk a little bit about that idea so that we can bring that into this conversation?
Well, you know, one of the things that liberatory, you know, means freedom, and it means, you know, freedom to be. And one of the things that we were trying to get across is our family engagement practice should be creating the conditions for people to be free to be who they are. You know this, Eyal, because you've taken my class. I always say to students is that, you know, you need to be doing work where you can bring your whole self to the table. And a lot of times we create conditions for our families where they don't feel they can bring their whole self. You just gave a perfect example of that. And a liberatory environment is one where people they can be their whole selves. And we acknowledge that, and we honor that, and we value that. And we're not trying to make them someone else through that assimilationist kind of mentality. So it's really freeing up, getting rid of the boxes, getting rid of the lines, getting rid of the bars that keep us from really seeing each other as whole people. As you know, Paulo Freire talks about seeing people as people and not as objects. So that's what we, you know, I wanted words that, you know, when people heard them, there was actually a reaction. And when I hear the word liberatory, it always makes me feel like, oh, I want to be open. I want to be free. And that's how all of our families should feel. That's how all our practitioners should feel when they're in this practice of family engagement together.
Yeah, I'm looking at the chat. I'm seeing Michael D'Souza from the Oakland Reach quoting Lila Watson: if you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let's work together.
Absolutely. And I used to have that as part of my signature years ago. So that I love that quote. And actually, it inspired me to use this liberatory language in our work of writing about family engagement, because that's what it means. And it means we're doing this work, and that comes with the solidarity driven, you know, in solidarity with one another.
Yeah. And to recognize that there are, despite all of our best intentions, there are dynamics of power at play when families and schools come together. And so while we don't necessarily intend it, that is the impact of a lot of the engagement between home and school. And so coming to open and realize where we are doing that work, coming to families and seeing like who you are is a beautiful thing, and you know your kids best, and I should come to you. And that kind of opening is what we talk about when we talk about solidarity. We're going to keep chatting about this. I do want to welcome Dr. Tom Kane into this conversation, because we want to also focus on the impact of family engagement. Is supposed to be, it's not a means, it's not an end in itself. Right? Family engagement is a means towards better outcomes for kids. And Dr. Kane we're really grateful to have you with us. He is on the faculty also at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, is the faculty colleagues, Karen and Tom, faculty director of the Center of Education Policy Research at Harvard. So he consults with a lot of schools and a lot of districts around the country. We're really lucky to have you with us, Dr. Kane. Welcome.
Thanks, Eyal, and it's nice to see you, Karen. I can't wait to see you in the hallway at Gutman.
I miss you.
Okay, so Dr. Kane, you've been looking at some really sobering data about the impact of the pandemic on student outcomes. Can you just share with us a little bit about what you're seeing?
Yes, Eyal. So I'm not providing any new news when I say that students have lost a lot of ground over the last couple of years. But the thing that really concerns me is I've seen very little connection between district plans now and the magnitude of students' losses. And it's all about magnitude. So like so the pandemic has created a hole, and some districts, students need a step stool to get out of the hole. In other districts, students need a ladder to get out of the hole. And it's all about understanding magnitudes of losses. And one of the reasons that's hard is that we talk about achievement losses in weird ways. Like we say, oh, there's been a 10 percentage point decline in proficiency, or like a 8 percentile point, decline on the NWEA MAP assessment. Mm-hmm. And like those are sort of inscrutable, sort of intangible units. Like, what do they even mean? How do I even know, like, how much of an intervention do I need to put together to close a 10 percentage point decline in proficiency rates or whatever? So that's something that I've been working on with a group of folks at NWEA and the assessment provider and AIR. And I'm going to give you 2 different ways to think about it. Because again, it's super important that you're planning a set of interventions, or districts are planning a set of things that actually have a hope of helping kids make up for the lost ground. So one way to think about it is to ask your research director in your school districts to report your losses, your students' losses, in terms of standard deviation units. Now, what is like a standard deviation is like a measure of dispersion that statisticians use. But here's why you want to ask your person to put it in terms of standard deviation units. And that's because all of the research on the efficacy of interventions, that's reported in standard deviation units. So for instance, based on our work with NWEA, we see that the average high poverty school, so like more than 75% of students receiving free or reduced price lunch, who were remote more or hybrid more than half the year last year. So the average school that was in that that situation lost 0.4 standard deviations. Now, some may have lost more, some may have lost less, but 0.4, just to give you a sense of how big that is and how much work we have to do to help kids catch up, is to compare that to like what was the magnitude of the effect of a high dosage tutoring program. Well, a high dosage tutoring program, the pre-pandemic research was saying you get about 0.38 standard deviations. So just pause for a moment. What that means is to close a 0.4 standard deviation gap loss, you could provide a tutor to every single one of your students and still not close the gap next year. Here's another way to think about magnitudes, and that is, so a lot of people sometimes like convert test score losses into weeks of instruction. Usually when people do that, they're just sort of blowing smoke. They're using some like completely arbitrary way to sort of convert, you know, test scores into weeks. Now, the NWEA data are great for doing this, or for doing a better job at that, because different people take the NWEA, different districts administer the NWEA test at different points in the year. And so NWEA has a lot of experience watching like the relationship between like the number of weeks of instruction kids have had before, between tests, you know, just to see what's the effect of an additional week of instruction. And so they've got really great ways to sort of convert test score points into weeks of instruction. So that same high poverty district that you know was remote, or high poverty school that was remote for half a year or more last year, they lost about 40% of a school year. Now, think about that for a minute. Like, what's it going to cost to close a 40% of school year gap? Is it, you know, one place to start would be to say, like, maybe it's 40% of an annual budget. That would be actually a conservative estimate, I would say, because to, do you think it's going to cost less per student to hire tutors and do other things on top than in the traditional model? So anyway, 40% of a school year, if 40% of an annual budget is about equivalent to what a lot of districts have gotten in this federal aid. And so what that's implying is that if you're in this category of schools that have seen, that were high poverty school that was remote for at least half the year last year, a conservative estimate of what it's going to cost to get kids back up to grade level is not 20% of the federal aid, but basically all of the federal aid, because that represents about 40% of the typical annual budget in a lot of districts. So in any case,
yeah,
what I've just been saying is, like, it's, don't just look at your numbers around like the magnitude of that, oh, our achievement is lost, we know that, so let's start doing it, putting together a few programs. It's about
understanding the magnitude,
having the magnitude and a plan that is gauged to that magnitude.
Yeah. I want to take this moment now to welcome Tina from the school perspective to give us a sense. And I just to name also that in the chat, there's been a lot of conversation around the term learning loss. I know that a lot of folks are concerned about the deficit framing, and we're happy to keep engaging on this conversation because there's a lot of folks who spend a lot of time thinking about schools and that do good work in schools that are thinking about this in a lot of different ways. And that's part of the point of what we're here to do. I think one thing that was really compelling to me about what you had shared with me, Tom, was that students who were low income that did not go remote lost, or their test score losses were less than students who were who were middle or upper income but did go remote. So it was really the remote nature of things that was the biggest driver. But I think it also is this question of, you know, that to me is that we have data, we have test scores as one useful tool, but we have a lot of useful tools to measure what we want schools to be doing and the environment and the culture. And so, Tina, welcome. I'm gonna going to turn to you, but just I want to introduce you real quickly and ask you to react to some of this. You are the Chief of Communications, Enrollment, and Engagement in Baltimore City Public Schools, which to me means that you're leading family engagement from the cabinet. And that's pretty rare, actually. Most schools and most districts don't have a family engagement leader that sits on the cabinet. You're seeing a lot of these dynamics firsthand. Just curious to hear your reactions to what you're hearing about which schools were able to weather the storm of the pandemic better, how you're using data in Baltimore City Public Schools to help you drive your decision-making. Give us a sense of what you're seeing and what you're doing.
Yep. Good afternoon. Thanks for having me here. We start out by saying when we had to close schools initially and had to figure out where our families were to begin with, we heard about trust earlier. We heard about family relationships and understanding who our families are and having connections. Those schools knew where their families were. Those schools were able to get to their families as soon as possible, get them the devices or the information they needed so they could connect virtually. And then we had to work over the summer to sort of get more of our schools so we could see the clear difference between those schools who had relationship and those that didn't, right? Over the summer before the sort of almost entire virtual year, it was then really doing the work with schools who had not done that work to build that relationship and trust, to understand what families needed and get the technology and the internet and all those things available to our kids. But then we're back in the cycle of virtual learning in the last quarter of 2021 school year. We opened up all of our schools for in-person learning. We did a gradual approach, knowing that our kids, as Tom just said, were much better off being in person than they were in a virtual space. And when we did that, you could see, like Brandon Pinckney's school in the video, right? You could see that the schools that had parents trusted them. It wasn't all with it. We could tell you our COVID protocols all day long. We could give background on what we're doing for safety measures, how we're going to engage your kids, how we're keep them safe. But the parents that went back were the principals who delivered that message, not just my team from communications, but the principals. I had one staff member in my team actually who was working at city schools who said, I'm not sending my kids back. And when she got on the phone with her principal for the parent meeting, she said, we're going. I'm done. I'm going. And I thought to myself, here's somebody who's close to the breast, who knows what city schools mitigation strategies are, our efforts are, and yet she's still and in the family engagement office and still was not comfortable sending her kids back to school until she heard from her principal. And like Brandon Pinckney and other principals, those principals who had that kind of relationship with families were the ones that got a huge percentage of families coming back in person in that first quarter that we came back in person. And then obviously we had to work over the summer to build a ton of trust with our families and hosted these amazing family festivals. We had like 17,000 participants show up across the city to say, we're ready, we're here for you. We want to engage and link with you and get your kids back in school in a really robust way. And families were scared because in the fall we went all in person. So everybody was back in person in fall of the small virtual academy, about 2,000 people. But it really made a difference to have that relational trust at the school, principal, and our frankly community school coordinator level of addressing family needs along with connecting to academic success that made a great formula for our families coming back.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a testament. Dr. Mapp, I'm going to ask you for your reactions. Because that really sounds like a lot of what we're talking about, that the schools, we know that in-person instruction makes a big difference. And we know that families are scared. They're like hit by the pandemic. I was working in a district that was really hard hit by the pandemic in 2020. And families were worried. They were seeing their neighbors dying of COVID and they did not want to send their kids back. And you cannot blame people for being worried, especially if if they didn't trust the school. But here we have an example of a school really trusting, or a school that had tried to build trust beforehand, getting kids back. Dr. Mapp, do you want to chime in?
Well, we know the strategies that, and I think Tom's magnitude point is very important here. We know the strategies. We have a bucket full of strategies, right, that we know we can use to try to help our students and get our students to where they need to be. And we've known them before the pandemic and we know them now. But I think what happens, and I think that Tina's example is perfect. So we know that the in-person was better for our students, right? But to get that to work and to deploy it needed the partnership. So whether it's tutoring, whether it's all the other interventions that we know that we need to do, and in some cases do more and double click on in certain communities and certain schools, the problem is that we don't recognize that the way we get those things done and get them done in a way that honors the fidelity of that intervention is always in partnership with families. When we try to go around the families, right? We got all these tools and methods and curriculums and all these things. When we try to go around the families, we don't have fidelity of implementation, right? Yeah. And we also don't have the partnership. You know, kids are only in school even when we are in school, 18% of the time during a year. That's it. The rest of the time, they're with their families, they're in the community. So why aren't we building partnerships to make sure that whatever we're doing in school gets supported in the community and at home? Why do we think we can do this work without our families? It just boggles the mind. So I think what Tina is saying works perfectly with what Tom is trying to encourage us to do. And this is the other problem. And this is why I miss Tom. We when we see each other every once in a while, we catch a little conversation. And this is a whole other conversation I don't want to have today. Yeah, I get concerned. I get concerned about how I see that money being spent. Because we're not seeing it being spent, and well, maybe with this crowd, we're not seeing it being spent on what we know works. And we're not seeing it being spent on things that are going to be sustainable after the 3 years is up. Yeah. And so, I'm hoping that people will see what are the basic foundational pieces we need to put in place to make sure that the tools that we do need to deploy are going to be done well. So I am hoping that in the strategies that we are putting in place, there's a family engagement component in them. Because again, if we continue to try to do this work around our families, we're missing the boat.
Yeah. And with the time we have left, I'm going to turn to you, Tina, because that is exactly what Baltimore City Public Schools is doing. We featured your work in the report quite prominently because there's a whole rash of things that you're doing to elevate family engagement. If folks haven't seen the new board policy for family community engagement at Baltimore City Public Schools, I urge you to take a look. It is a real great example of tying family engagement to student learning. Your pandemic recovery plan calls for student learning plans co-designed between every family, student, and child, 70,000 kids, co-designing with every single family in the district. I would love to hear, Tina, with the 2 minutes we have left, we do 3 minutes, just with the time we have left, like, what are you learning from because that's an ambitious agenda. Like, what are you learning to pull that can be helpful to this crowd?
Yeah, I mean, thank you. It's a lot, right? The student learning plans in the beginning of the year, we had this grand vision that every single teacher would have them done first quarter, right? And the reality is that was too much. It was too much to ask for, but it was the right thing to ask for. These student learning plans, we're so excited about them, whether it's co-creation with the teacher, the student, and the parent, understanding where a student is and then where they need to go, right? And how we can work together to get that to happen. Teachers needed more coaching, they needed more training, they needed more time in their schedules to complete these, and they needed staff support at the school level in order to create these plans. We put those in place to make those things happen. So we actually had time in the schedule. And then we also had to work in, as a side note, wellness days, teachers, because they're like, I can't do all this extra work you're putting on me. And this is the hardest year of school we've ever had. And now you want me to do this too? So we had to honor teacher voice and also pay attention to that as well. So it really has mattered. I will just say quickly, the investments we've also made to connect to families, right, in language, in making sure that we have 10,000 families whose primary language is Spanish that we've never communicated with before in the right way. Talk about building trust and wanting to make investments, like investing in that kind of connection and strategy is what really mattered. And then everybody else's wellness, teacher wellness, student wellness, we actually focus on family wellness as well. In addition to our community schools coordinators doing resources and support through partnerships and engagement, we also created parent cafes where families could come and talk about parenting and struggles and reality of what it takes during this time in pandemic to really support your child's learning and to be a whole healthy parent at the same time. So all of this is the investments are the right way, but I'm just lucky that I'm in a place where I get to sit on cabinet and force my cabinet members to listen to feedback from families as they make decisions about how we're moving forward, about how they partner differently, and how we honor family voice and student voice in our plans for our kids.
That advocacy spirit never dies. Once you're in there, that's like, we're all going to listen to families. You're going to come with me. We're going to go into the community. I love that.
That's right.
I'm going to transition us now. We could go on for a really long time here. I'm sorry we didn't get to hear more from you, Dr. Kane. Thank you for chiming in the chat. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, Dr. Mapp. Thank you always for sharing your wisdom. And Tina, so much of your work happens behind the scenes. It can be a grind being in that district life. So I just want to say that I see you and I thank you to you and to all the other district leaders we have on this call. Thank you so much for showing us the way. I'm going to transition us now. In this next section of the convening, we're going to go into some small group dialogue with a leader that we have cited in our report. So some of you, these are all folks that are really driving change, much like Tina is in Baltimore. The goal is to give us just a chance to be in dialogue, in conversation about these issues. You're welcome to react to what you've heard so far and share your views alongside what these leaders are going to be sharing. So some of you will hear from Brandon Pinkney, who you'll recognize from the videos, a principal at the Walter P. Carter School in Baltimore. Some will hear from Dr. Sade Thomas Harris, who's the Chief Engagement Officer, also sitting on the cabinet at Richmond Public Schools. Another group of you will hear from Dr. Carrie Randolph, who serves as the Chief Strategy Officer in the Metro Nashville Public Schools. And finally, the final group will be with Dr. Lori James Gross, who is the superintendent in the Unity Point School District number 140 in rural Southern Illinois, Carbondale, Illinois. So these are going to be really rich discussions. I suspect these might be the best part of this convening. We're not going to be recording this session, but there will be a note taker and a facilitator from Learning Heroes in each of these rooms. We have randomly assigned everybody to a room. So we expect that you'll be able to learn from any one of the rooms. So we've randomly assigned people to the rooms. We're going to have just under 20 minutes 15 to 20 minutes to engage in this dialogue. And when we come back, we're going to hear from a panel of parent leaders and then a panel of leaders from philanthropy. So off we go.
So thank you all so much. We want to hear your reflections. So please drop, what you learned, any good pushes, any ahas in the chat box as we get started. I am now so incredibly humbled and excited to introduce two trailblazers who are really elevating parent voice and power at the ground level, but are getting national recognition for their good work. I'm introducing Ms. Danisha Fields, Chief of Staff and Operations and Fellowship at the Memphis Lift, and Dr. Michael D'Souza, who is Chief Program Officer at the Oakland Reach. I really want to just ask for a little bit of grace. Dr. Sarah Carpenter, who, as you all know, is the Executive Director of Memphis Lift, was on the agenda and scheduled to be here, but is unfortunately still recovering from a procedure. So we ask that you keep her in your prayers, and really want to give a special shout out and thanks to Danisha for stepping in at the last minute, but I'm thrilled to have you both with us. So I'm going to kick it off with one question, ask you both to answer, and then I'm going to turn it over to the participants to really engage in a conversation with you all. So the first question is, as Ayal was talking and Dr. Mapp and others around the importance of building trust. Your work, both of your organizations, that is what you begin with. That is foundational, right? You truly listen to parents and then mobilize based on what you hear. So my first question is, can you share what you've learned around the value of trust and what that looks like, what that deep listening looks like, and then how you work in solidarity with parents in your community? So Tanisha, do you want to kick us off?
Yes. Building trust with parents begins with meeting the parents where they are. Um, Not every parent is mobile, and it's not also just transportation. It's mentally. We go by the quote from Harriet Tubman. I freed 1,000 slaves, but I could have freed 1,000 more if only they knew they were slaves. So it's about changing the mindset of parents that these are your babies. So for 2020, that's our theme this year. Who do the children belong to? They belong to you. Therefore, you have the very right to be active in your child's education. You need to know what's going on and be a part of their planning process. So building trust, it's like when we're knocking on doors and meeting parents for grocery stores, it's like to educate them on what's happening with the system and what they know. It's letting them know we are you. We are the parents that we serve. So just like you didn't know, I didn't know, someone told me, now I'm here to tell you, and we're going to walk this journey together, and we're going to fight for the best for all children, regardless of whatever zip code, what your parents do for a living, what neighborhood you stay in, that doesn't matter. Every student in Memphis Shelby County deserves a high quality education in this public system that we are living in, and we come together to change it. So when they see that we are for real, when we build that trust with them, then I'm ready. You give me my education, you build me up, so we empower, engage, and we activate. And once we do that, once they see that we got your back, that trust, we build on that relationship, whether if they have barriers that prevent them from being focused on the issues that their child may be having in school. Once we help them overcome those barriers, then they're focused on their children's education and they're all in. So it's meeting the parents where they are, getting them prepared, and just letting them see that we do have your back. And we understand the trials and tribulations that we have as a parent. And when we come together as that village for our children, that's strengthening our relationships and our bonds. And like we've been in existence, and we're in year 7, and we have some faithful parents that are still with us here in year 7, fighting for all children here in this. So trust is valuable and it's important, just amongst us. And then when we start talking about the schools, man, trust begins when you enroll your child in that school. When you're filling out that paperwork, I used to call it a home loan application, because back in the day, we used to have to fill out papers, this, six, to enroll our children in school. So like that's where the trust began. And you, as a school leader, as a teacher, wherever your role is in this learning facility, you have to build on that relationship to keep that trust with your parents, because whether you know or not, parents are your greatest ally. There's some things that we can say that you can't say in order if you want to keep your job. So you have to have that trust there with your parents. And parent engagement is beyond pizza night to meet a Title I metric. It's beyond having parents in the room making copies and stapling papers, making packets. Parent engagement is just what it says, parent engagement. You're sitting down with your child. I love the video where the principal said that they sent home assessment results and parents, and they didn't take the time out to explain to the parents what that meant. That's what we're fighting for here in Memphis with our My Child's Learning Path. It's like, that's what we asked for. We all heard that term, learning loss, but parents didn't know what that meant. Like, we were suffering learning loss before the pandemic. So we came up with this plan to where you take your child's assessment, you give them a diagnostic testing, and then you have a data night and you review what that means, what it looks like, what it should look like, what possibly happened if your child was sick during this time, and how attendance affects your child's grades and assessment results. And we create a plan going from there on how to get that child on the grade level. We talk about explaining what RTI peers are, explaining how attendance affects. I mean, just breaking down those reports so the parents can understand. So we come together as that village and come together and do what needs to be done for the student in order for them to be successful and grow.
Exactly. Thank
I
you
know I
so
said a
much.
lot.
I mean, you guys, before I turn over to Michael, truly empower, really building that authentic trust, and then working with families, responding to them based on what they need, right? So I'm a big fan of the My Child's Path, that learning guide. It is so easy to use, really gives parents the information they need to be best advocates and maximize their role. So thank you for sharing those examples. If we have time, I want to come back and dig deeper into that My Child's Path, perhaps in some of the learnings all along the way. But thank you for those examples. So Michael, I'm going to turn it over to you. What does trust look like for you all at Oakland Reach?
Yeah, first, Danisha, thank you so much. Hoping to get out to Memphis and meet you and be back with our cousins on the other side of the country. But yeah, I have a lot to share. I'm going to figure out how to pick the ones I want to say the most, but who we are really changes how we lead. And I always think about my parents when I lead and the work that we do at the Reach, and all of us think a lot about our stories. And so we actually talk a lot about storytelling as a key leadership move for all of our staff. All of our staff work really hard on practicing how to tell their story. So we have a team of family liaisons whose job is, similar to Danisha, is to build relationships with families and to have conversations about the dreams they have for their family, the dreams they have for their children, and what's getting in the way of them meeting those goals. So for trust for us means, how are we processing our own educational experiences? How does being the son of immigrants change the way I show up? How does the fact that my children get to go to better schools than my parents only got to go to third grade, right? The fact that I was able to go to college, what does that mean versus what my parents and my grandparents and my ancestors experienced? That I bring these stories, and we bring these stories to every interaction, so that eventually our families can unearth both their educational experiences, but also the history of what's going on for their family. So that's one thing. Storytelling and listening is really important. To build powerful relationships and being able to be vulnerable with yourself about what you're experiencing, so families can do the same to you. The other thing we say at the Oakland Reach often is, you have to be a friend before you need a friend. So we listen to families and we figure out what they need, and we provide it to them. So an example of that, before the pandemic, we surveyed families, and 80% of them said, I'm really worried about my baby's reading. It's keeping me up at night. I'm not sure if they're reading on grade level. And so we ran a whole campaign, and we pushed for a policy at the district level to make sure that every child had access to systematic literacy instruction. And it was a beautiful campaign. We got like the NAACP on board, the mayor's office, several nonprofits, charter schools, the district, all around the same table saying, let's do this together. And we were going to run a big summit. We got the policy passed. We were going to bring all the teachers and principals together and have them listen to parents and what they need for their babies to become good readers. And that's when COVID hit. But we still knew that our families were worried about literacy. And so we created what we call the Hub. So during the entire pandemic, we ran an online community that provided high quality virtual learning opportunities, some of which were staff that we hired, teachers that were mamas and aunties and primas in the community to teach our kids how to read. We also partnered with like an East Oakland Black-led dojo that provided martial arts classes, and the Black Literary Collective that taught poetry and creative writing classes. And we eventually had about 24 partners from across the country, including large orgs like Reconstruction.us, to provide high quality programming directly to our kids. At the same time, we know that families want great things for their kids. We gave them the porterhouse for their kids. But we also knew that they needed support too. So every family had their own case manager. We called them family liaisons. The role of the family liaison is to make sure that you're listening to families and building relationship with families, and empowering families to be able to go back to their school to ask for the porterhouse. Because once we gave it to them, they didn't want to go back to the round anymore. So I can share a little more information about our hub. If you're interested, I can put it in the chat. But we realize that if families have aspirations for their children that are academic, that we also need to address the aspirations that families have for themselves and for what they need to make sure that their family is stable. And so another really important pillar to building relationships at the Hub and at the Oakland Reach was providing community spaces for families to come and be their whole selves, in joy and in pain. And so appreciate Wendy and Kelsey, who've come several times to what we call our Family Sustainability Center, which is a virtual space that we invite families to. And we consistently draw about 100 families into those spaces. And we usually alternate between academic or educational leadership topics for families to engage with, or we talk about socioeconomic issues. So mental health issues, nutrition, housing rights, all the things that families were struggling with and will continue to struggle with because of the impacts of systemic racism and the pandemic on our families. So We built a model that we are now pushing into districts, which is holding the whole family and building relationships deeply with family. And so now our work with the district is to bring our model for literacy liberation. We love that word liberation at the LLC. So that we're hiring mamas and aunties to be the literacy teachers for our children. And so we just launched a partnership with the district to hire 50 community members to be high quality literacy teachers in all of our schools. We call it the Trojan horse. So once we get our families in the schools and they can talk about their community from a place of assets and strength, and they actually know how to teach babies how to read, then they then become the leaders that our school system needs, because a lot of teachers in our school system still don't know how to teach kids to read, because to be honest, our teacher training programs don't teach them. And a lot of the teachers in Oakland don't look like the students they serve. We have a lot of like tourist teachers who come in for a few years and leave. So we want folks to see family members, cousins, aunties in their schools, so they can push for the quality experiences that we've been able to provide them. That's trust. That's being a friend before you need a friend, right? You give them what they want, give families what they've been asking for, and then all of a sudden you find yourself, you have some trust.
Absolutely. And it's incredible how you've been able to be responsive, like I said, both to the academics and that range, really responding to what parents care most about. So I just also want to say, when Kelsey and I have participated, the energy in those meetings and those workshops is so infectious. I walk away sort of just smiling for days after that. So thanks for giving us that opportunity once in a while. So I'm going to turn it over to questions. We'll see if there are any from folks in the room, but I'm going to follow up with a brief one. So we both talked about the powerful ways that you are really prioritizing trust building and then responding to that. Can you talk a little bit about learnings along the way as it relates to really creating those critical systems, and that often involve working in collaboration with the districts? So I know, Danisha, for example, for the My Child's Path, you worked, my understanding, collaboration, right, with the district, and same for you, Michael. Just, learnings along the way for the folks in the room, because we know that that part can be tricky, right? To say the least.
Oh my God.
Tricky to say the least.
So what triggered our My Child's Learning Path is we started getting phone calls from parents. It's like, hey, this pandemic has the school shutting down. I'm not hearing from my school. I don't know what's going on. And I know my child is not reading on grade level. I already know that they are behind. It's like, what are we going to do? Do you all have any resources that we can use? So it's like we got all these parents together. We form focus groups. And it's like, what do you need to see? What do you want to see? What are your concerns? And we jot all those ideas down. And that's how we created the My Child's Learning Path. And when we presented it to the district, we've been working on it for almost 2 years. It's like since the pandemic, we've been working on it, and it finally has come to fruition. So it's in use. The district created a dashboard, Empower School, where parents have 24 access to their child's data, where they can go in and see all of their records, they can be shared online, and they can start making plans accordingly. And it's amazing. It's that we were able to get this done. We're working with a few charter schools to get it implemented in their spaces, and going back to that trust. If we didn't have that trust and building those relationships, we could have gotten this done. And Michael, you talk about be a friend before you need a friend. I think I've known Sarah for 7 years now, and that's all she has been saying to everyone, school leaders. It's like, be a friend before you need a friend. It's like, if you get parents activated, they will go to bat for you. If you're doing right by our children, they will go to bat for you, and you don't have to coach them with a dinner to say, hey, go take this in front of this person. If you're doing what you're doing for our children, like you said you are, because let's be real, most of the people that are coming to our neighborhoods, educating our children, are not from our neighborhoods. That's why this relationship is key. This parental engagement is key. Peace is key. Is because we are the community. As parents, we are the community. We know our community, and we know what our community needs in order to regulate. So having these relationships are key. And also, the reason why I mentioned that be a friend before you need a friend is we are about to break ground on a parent resource center here in North Memphis for families. So like I said earlier, parents have barriers that they can't address because, they can't address the needs of their children in school because they have barriers. So we're hoping to have a clothes closet, food pantry, get some laundry equipment. So if families just need to come and wash a load of clothes, that's there. If they just need to sit down and talk to someone, that space is there. So we're here for our community because our children are our future. And Ms. Carpenter always says, if our children are uneducated, they turn to criminals, and criminals are mobile. So they're not just in the low income communities. They can carjack you in one neighborhood and drive to another neighborhood and commit a crime. And we're trying to destroy that stereotype for all children.
Yeah.
So
thank you.
Your friend.
Yes, we're going to include that as one of the quotes for sure in our synopsis. It says so much. So we thank you for that. We have a minute left, Michael. Anything just you can share in terms of learnings, insights, as you've been working with schools and other folks to create those systems?
Yeah, I just dropped it in the chat. You guys can look at it later, but we've had a big shift in the way we think about moving work. We are a parent advocacy organization for now 5 years, and we were doing policy campaigns. But now we realize that we actually have to have a two-handed kind of attack, that you have to create solutions so that families see that you're meeting their needs, and you have to have proof points. And so the hub and our literacy programs are now, we showed them how to do it. Yeah. So now when we ask them to do it, we're like, no, it could be done. Our babies grew 2 levels of reading in 5 weeks. So before we were knocking on the door and asking the system, asking people in power to do things for us, and that has never worked. So now we come with the advocacy, but we also have the solution. And so I think that's a really important learning. If you check out the the Power Parent Playbook, you'll see some ideas around how we've shifted around the way we shift schools. And I would say just this last thing is, for districts, there's stuff that you might want to do inside and hire people inside. But I actually think there's an important power dynamic of having organizations and CBOs that stand outside, because you can just get to work and fight in a different way when your paycheck doesn't come from the superintendent, right? Now, our relationship with the superintendent is actually really powerful, but she also knows that we will check her whenever we need to, right? And she knows that, but ultimately she wants the same thing that we want. We want our babies to learn to read. We want them to have jobs when they graduate. We want them to be successful. She wants the same thing. So I think this inside-outside game has been something that we've learned a lot about, that we're just not going to be knocking on the boardroom door anymore. We're actually going to show up and say, we are creating solutions, so you need to have us at the table.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes me think of what Dr. Mapp said earlier. Why would we think that we could do this work without parents? Why do we think we can do it without the community, right? All of the amazing learning supports that are in our community, like you all, that are a resource for districts, right? So thank you all both so much for all of the work that you are doing on behalf of our families to advance this work, and for your time today. Really appreciate it. I am now really excited to introduce our fearless leader, Bib Hubbard, who is going to dig in with some funders who are leading the way in investing in this work. Thank you, Michael and Denisha, so much.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Michael and Denisha, I'm Wendy, so inspired by what I've heard. I love, Michael, you talked about community spaces, and so you can share in the joy and the pain, because there is so much joy and there's so much pain. And Denisha, I love that you talked about the Parent Resource Center and having parents' backs, and just the through line of trust and relationship is really powerful. So thank you. Now we're going to quickly turn to our panel of funders. So I'd love to invite them in and get them spotlighted. I can introduce Ambika Kapoor, Program Officer for the Carnegie Corporation of New York, which I think she probably doesn't, none of these women who are so incredible need any introductions. But Ambika has been with us on this journey from the very beginning. And I can't, and for most of you on this call, like, she's just been such a guiding and a shining light, and just willing to take risks. So thank you. And thank you for taking time today. I'm also really excited to introduce Dr. Ghislaine Ngunu, Interim President for the Nellie Mae Educational Foundation. And I had the opportunity to meet with her briefly last week and was blown away, and now completely understand why Nellie Mae has grabbed you into that position as they're centering their strategy around racial equity. And so eager to dive in with you. And then welcome to Dr. Brooke Stafford-Brizard. Also, I think most people know all of you. Brooke is Vice President of the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, leading their research to practice portfolio, which as a data geek, I love. I mean, we're all about taking research and turning it into action. So I think that whole, it's such the best frame. And the thing about Brooke, I think most of you know, but she is grounded in the science of learning and development, but is also, brings everything with this very humanistic, empathetic lens, which just sort of shines through. So all three of you have been doing such incredible work and really appreciate you being here. So to get us started, and again, hoping people can continue the chat. It's been super cool to see everyone's different comments and thoughts. But we've got sort of three big meaty questions. The first is around the issue of trust. We've been talking about trust and relationship throughout. I think it's sort of an important through line, but specifically about the power dynamics between families and schools. And I think, Dr. Mapp at the outset talked about liberatory being the freedom to be, right? And that really resonated with me, that we all get to sort of show up who we authentically are. And we do a lot of research with parents, and we know there's a lot of intimidation to go into the schools oftentimes for lots of different reasons. But Ghislaine, I'd love to start with you, the role of trust in establishing power dynamics between families and schools, and why does that even matter? Like, from your lens, if you could just talk about that context of families as allies and advocates, what does this power distribution mean, and where are we today, and where should we try and get to?
Oh my goodness, thank you.
I know, an easy a softball.
Hi everyone, I'm Bika Brooke. It's a pleasure to meet you, and it's really an honor to be here. I think about that question a lot, Bib, and I think the place where we start is by thinking about history, right? Whether we're thinking about history and the history of philanthropy or the history of public education and its design. However we look at it, thinking about how these designs are rooted in policies and practices that harm in many ways, and particularly harm the children, young people, and the families that either have been historically marginalized, undercapitalized, under-resourced. And so I think that's where, at least I and the folks I work with, start when we think about power, right? It's who holds decision-making, who holds the control of resources. And then there is also power, especially as we think about families and parents. There's power that is innate and power that people have been so, either oppressed to not believe that they indeed have it and that they can wield it. They can, pool their various sources and forms of power together to actually advocate for change. And shift narratives and shift how things function in schools. So as an organization and in philanthropy, we think explicitly about the role that communities and families play in helping to design philanthropic strategy and helping to not only design it, but also helping to implement it, right? What types of initiatives, what types of grant funds do we fund? How do we ensure that families and parents and young people have a seat at the table and aren't just tokenized and giving input that may or may not be actualized, right? So really trying to think from a place of those who have and hold proximity to the experiences, the challenges, and the pain that exists in our schools and our communities, hold knowledge and wisdom that is fundamentally essential to solution design, and to change and to transformation. And when we hold that to be true, it means that as leaders in philanthropy or in schools or in district offices, we have to give up power. We have to share power. We have to wield power differently, right? Like we have to get out of the way, which is hard. It's hard for people to give up power. It sounds good in theory, it sounds noble, but it's really challenging to actualize. And it makes me believe in the power of advocacy and grassroots and movement building, which we can get into a little bit later.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate that. I feel like, you know, parents not just being tokenized, like that is sort of what got me into this whole thing, is just watching parents be so overlooked and undervalued in all of the massive change. And Bika, I saw you shaking your head, and I know you've done a lot of thinking around sort of this power dynamics through your own grant making in your new portfolio. I don't know if you could share kind of what the impetus was for that, and how are you going to kind of stay committed to, you know, creating new power dynamics in favor of families and students and learning.
Sorry, but it says I've been signed out. Sorry about that.
We can see you.
Well, it's great to be here. I so many familiar faces. You know, just to hear Karen Mapp, you know, Dr. Mapp has inspired a lot of our thinking. And Bib, when you introduced me, it's like, I've been doing this for a long time, but almost so it's been sort of this learning journey. We've all known for a long time, the research has shown that when families are engaged in their children's education, you see greater student achievement. You know, even our grant making is at the foundation is sort of, you know, with the assumption, with the belief that when parents are seen as true partners in their children's education, it's not just, you know, students thrive, schools do better, the community benefits too. And yet we haven't seen, I mean, some of the examples today were really inspiring of like how we've actually seen school districts take on family engagement, but overall it's sort of still as a nice to have. And it hasn't become sort of that partnership between, or that trust between home and school is still not there. So we, you know, we've been on this learning journey. We've been supporting organizations working at that intersection between home and school around student success now for about, you know, 4.5, 5 years. And, you know, a lot of you on this call, you're doing amazing work and it's important, but how do we sort of, you know, foster that trust and that collaboration that happens between home and school? How does it go to scale? What does scale even look like? So I would say, I agreed with you, Ghislaine, when you were talking about, you know, what does it mean, the power dynamics, even philanthropy. We are just facilitators of this work. We don't do it. And I think a part of the learning journey for us has been, well, we should be supporting that trust building takes some time. So we've been looking at our, you know, the organizations that we support and say, well, take that time. It doesn't, you know, it's not just we've been supporting the activities or the tools and resources that connect families and schools, but that trust building needs to happen first. So we've been sort of embarking on new ways of grant making. We released our first ever RFP around family engagement, our family engagement around student success, opening it up to organizations that are closest to the issues in their communities. And we have a lot to learn from these organizations. You know, we just announced 10 of them starting on March 1st. But even in terms of how we did our grant making, who reviewed these proposals, we asked parents, students, teachers, all the stakeholders. You know, they know these issues better than we do. So that's another way of like, how do we give up power and yet be that facilitator of resources that organizations, schools, and families can connect around.
Yeah. So with that, you know, Brooke, I'm going to turn to you, and I'm going to pull in Sarah Carpenter. Thank you, Sarah, for your good chats. She says, you know, giving up power, that's the key. And Ghislaine, you talked about that too. So, you know, funders obviously wield a ton of power, right? Like we all want to say that we're not chasing the dollars, but let's be honest, sometimes we have to chase the dollars just to keep the lights on. And Sarah also makes this really important point that only the people closest to the problem can fix it. And so I know that at CZI, you guys are, you know, it seems like in the past year or so, you've really tried to sort of turn your grant making on its head to get more, help support those more proximate. But and again, for everybody, you know, just sort of the elephant in the room with funders, and I'm a former funder, so I sort of have that hat too from way back when. But, you know, how do you not lead people to go a certain direction, but follow that direction? Because we're all trying to fit in within strategy. So I don't know if you could, but I know that CZI has really been sort of pushing and pulling on this point. So would love to just hear kind of your thoughts along those lines.
Absolutely. And what an honor to be on a panel with such incredible women leading this work. I think I would, when we kind of looked at the field in early 2021, and we were thinking about kind of how do we continue to address the impact of this pandemic and the racial reckoning that our country was going through. We asked ourselves kind of where our vision of transformation fit within that. And that's one of a whole child perspective, right? That you mentioned, Bib, which is kind of includes academic learning, but also identity, safety, mental well-being, social emotional supports. And we saw a huge demand for that and huge demand that the system not kind of go back to the way it was, but we weren't seeing that demand connected to power in terms of decision-making, where money was flowing. And so that's where we, as an example, kind of lifted up a portfolio of partners, including Michael at the Reach, to focus on student, caregiver, parent power and shifting where decision-making is happening and where power sits in communities. You also, like in doing that, you don't get to name the demand with specifics, right? We connect it to our vision, but you trust the communities and what they're actually demanding. And so that portfolio includes a lot, it's a diverse set of partners in community closest to students and families and educators. And partnering with those organizations means really deferring to what they are demanding, not connecting it to our specific vision or for transformation.
Has that created any discomfort for you guys, or what has been like, you know, has anything, I mean, it sounds like that's obviously the right thing to do, but I just am curious, like looking backwards, were there any curveballs or surprises, or you're like, oh gosh?
You know, not yet. I mean, I think like how we fund, I think is part of it, right? A lot of this portfolio is general operating supports. Like we went to organizations who do the thing, right? And a lot of time as funders, we projectize and we tie it to specific projects, specific outcomes connected to our strategy. And so I would name, like, I think that at times within philanthropy can feel uncomfortable because it's just naming, like, you and your organization do the thing that we are trying to invest in and we're trusting you completely with general operating supports versus let's really like tie this specifically to a project that tethers to us and our strategy.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to pull in a question from Andrew Fishman for all three of you, so you guys can jump in. He's asking about, you know, how you view varied strategies to spread, scale deeper parent-family engagement. Are you drawn more towards incremental continuous improvement or, you know, as adopted as bite-sized chunks? And are you trying to tackle like big systemic change? So like, or both and I think, Mbika, this sort of speaks to the scale question that you and I were talking, all three of us were talking about earlier on the prep call, but like, you know, defining scale for you guys in terms of as a goal, what sits underneath that. So just sort of the concept of scale. And as you know, Andrew's talking about, you know, what are the strategies underneath that, I guess. I would love to hear from all of you.
Yeah, I can start, and I'd love to hear from both Ghislaine and Brooke as well. For us, it depends on the nature of the project. I think that depending on if we are funding an organization or you know, a project that is working locally in a particular school district, you know, scale would be depending on the activities the organization is implementing. The scale will depend upon deepening the work in that particular district, or scale could mean we don't define it. It really depends. We sort of, as part of our strategy, we let the organization sort of decide what that might look like. So if it could be a national organization, say like Learning Heroes, you know, the reach, you're a national organization, you do listening across the country with focus groups and, you know, surveys. You talk about the scale of how many families you might reach. So that's a different kind of scale. So it all depends on the organization. So it's when people say to us, you know, what do you mean by scale? I think it all depends on the nature of the organization. And I want to pick up on something that Brooke said too about, you know, it's as we sort of give up power a little bit, it's more about the organization. It's, you know, general support. We are trusting you to do, you know, as a partnership with philanthropy about, you know, the needs that you're meeting in your community. So a lot of it is determined by the organization.
Ghislaine, would love your thoughts here too.
Yeah. The scale question takes me to a frame that we've looked at here. It's Cynthia Coburn frame on rethinking scale, where she describes 4 dimensions to it, right? Depth, sustainability, spread, and shift in reform ownership. So that has been helpful in kind of thinking about scale in the work that we do. So in terms of sustainability, right? Like when we think about parent and family engagement work here, one of the portfolios that we invest significantly in is supporting organizations led by people of color. And many of these organizations are led by people of color who are about building parent capacity in work, right? Like, and we look at sustainability in terms of, and like that has led us to shifting our grant making practice around longer term investments, which I'm super excited about. You know, we used to do the 1-year investments, submit a report, then we'll see if we fund you again. But if we think of scale as how do we sustain this work in ways that are really meaningful, knowing that change takes time. Sustainability, well, scale through sustainability looks like longer term, multi-year support, general operating support. Like in the dimension where we talk about depth, what we've done is think about concentration of efforts in communities. So Nellie Mae is a regional funder. So, you know, most of our investments are in the New England region. So instead of, you know, just funding everything everywhere, which is not even possible, we've really thought about, you know, where there is energy, where there is momentum, where there are demands. And we are intentionally funding multiple parent serving, parent-led, family serving, youth-led organizations that are engaging in mutually reinforcing activities. So in that way, we think about like depth of effort and depth of investment. And then when it comes to spread, you know, we're like, you know what, there is strength and there's power in numbers. So our spread scale approach looks like how we think about funding advocacy and coalition and movement and power building work. So we have parent organizations that are connecting with each other across states to like identify some like similar issues that they're working on. So when you have parent leading for educational equity in Portland, Maine, contacting women leading for education in Revere, Mass, right? Like we know there's something happening there. And that like their efforts are spreading across boundary lines in ways that are more significant and more impactful. And then the shift in reform ownership for us has looked like designing a community advisory structure that helps to design and implement strategy, and that holds us accountable. And this is a structure that includes parents, it includes young people who are very vocal, it includes educators, and it's something that as a foundation we didn't used to do, but they've taken ownership of our strategy. You know, I tend to operate from a position of this is not my money, these aren't our resources, so they're not really ours to control. So while we are fiduciary and responsible grant makers, you know, we do have to take the lead of those who are more proximate and turn over ownership of these resources in some capacity to the people who have more of the solutions. And that includes families and communities.
I love that. Thank you. That's really helpful architecture and framework to sort of dig into. So Brooke, we have a few minutes remaining. Would love to hear your thoughts on sort of this as we go deeper, but talking about the scale question, and what that means for you and your foundation.
Yeah, I think when we think about scale and sustainability as it connects to dollars and funding, like that will always turn to public dollars, right? Like we will never have scale and sustainability if we don't recognize that we need policies and shifts in public dollars connected to our partners and the work that we're investing in. So that's a huge area of our focus. And it's why we focus on research to practice, because evidence is so critical, and evidence that kind of demonstrates so much of what we heard today. And Dr. Mapp asked us to think about this, like how are relationships actually tied to the outcomes that we're seeing that are very positive as we continue to navigate through this pandemic. And I would also say to answer Andrew's question, we're doing this in different ways, and we're not the only ones, but when we think about how we conduct research, we're thinking about that very differently. So, how are we actually involving parents, families, students, and educators in the design of measures of learning environments? One of our partners at Village of Wisdom is building a tool that's assessing how culturally affirming a school is, designed by Black families. And so how we're generating the evidence is something that we're thinking about very differently, but it's all on that path toward how do we actually see a shift in public dollars and policy that will ensure sustainability.
That's super powerful. So thank you. And I could have this conversation for another hour easily or more. So hopefully we'll be able to do that. But as we just close out, we started the day thinking about what brings us hope. And just really quickly, would love to hear what gives you hope as funders as we sort of head into the summer and next fall, just really quickly. And then I'll turn it back to Eyal to wrap us up. So Ghislaine, you want to go first?
Sure. There's so much that gives me hope. Earlier in my small group, I shared that young people who organize and demand change give me hope because they bring results and they are far more unapologetic than adults are and inspiring in their bravery and courage. And I will say, participatory grant making and really seeing some funders, some philanthropic entities operate differently and reimagining how we be in relationship in this work also gives me hope.
Wonderful. Brooke, you want to go next?
Yeah, you helped us out by starting our 2 hours with this question, and I'll share what I share. I believe, and I'm seeing it and feeling it, that we're kind of entering a phase of healing. Again, we're not through the pandemic. We have a lot of work to do as a society, as a globe. But I said, we're getting better at these virtual convenings where we're finding our way back to each other in person, and there's a sense of healing in that I think is incredibly restorative.
Thank you. Ambika, what gives you hope real quick?
I would say the same thing. It's sort of, I think people, the pandemic actually, I mean, it was such a hard time for all of us, but it brought us together in some ways, especially around family engagement. So that gives me hope. We're having this conversation now, and it seems that it gives me hope that all of the issues that we were sort of talking about today, I feel parents had a peek into their children's education, schools are beginning to see the importance of this. I feel like, again, that gives me hope that we did come together, and I hope we can stay together.
Well, thank you. Thank you. You guys have given me hope, and really appreciate this time and your wisdom. I know I learned a ton. Yeah, snaps for you guys. So I'm going to turn it over to Eyal to close us out of this incredible session with some calls to action and next steps. So Eyal, take it away.
Yeah, thank you. This conversation gives me hope. I'm tasked with giving a quick closing and a call to action, but I'm just thinking about this conversation around power. I'm thinking about this conversation that Ms. Carpenter raised about the people closest to the problem are really the only ones that can fix the problem and actually truly define the problem. And I'm thinking about Dr. D'Souza's call to tell stories as a part of this. And so that reminds me of when I was really like in my very first couple of weeks doing mentoring work with young people, with Latino immigrant kids that had similar backgrounds to mine. And I was really excited to get all these resources and try to give as much as I could to their families. And so I went to a mentor at my organization and I asked her, what are all the things that I should be telling kids? And what are all the things that I should be giving them? And I was really excited. And she just told me to stop and to listen to them. That the best thing that I could do is honestly is just to listen to them. And I was like, no, but like, okay, I'll listen to them, but then what do I give them? What do I tell them? And she just reiterated that the best thing I can do is listen to them. And that has stuck with me as my career has moved me into working more directly inside of schools, because the relationship between schools and families is so often that we tell parents the things that we think that they should know. We don't really genuinely listen to them. And that is an instrument of power. Who sets the agenda? What language we talk about? What language we talk in? Where we host the meetings? Who gets to decide when we host the meetings? So sometimes systems work is really complex, but the fundamentals are actually very simple. So I'm getting a 1-minute warning, so I'm going to close us out as quickly as I can. We want to share a little bit about what's coming next. So we're going to be following up with a little synthesis of what transpired today. We're going to share also, we're going to be following up with an email to everybody who registered with a synthesis, a recording of this event so you can share with your colleagues, and just an opportunity for you to be able to provide some feedback on what you think was the value of this event and what do you think should come next, really. That's what we would like to hear from you. Some folks need some time to think about it. If you'd like to share in the chat, you're welcome to now. But two things that we are at Learning Heroes really committing to now. One is we really think that there's a lot of power in this storytelling, and we're certainly not the first to do that with our report or with this convening, but we'd like to keep up this drumbeat, and we at Learning Heroes have some expertise around communications. And so we're going to be reaching out to the districts that are on this call and districts around the country to share with us your stories about how you are elevating family and community engagement. How are you addressing bias? How are you using your ESSER dollars very tactically? These types of questions, so that we can keep up the drumbeat. And so we're going to invite districts to share with us, and we're going to invite those of you who don't work in districts, if you'd like to join us in that project and you'd like to contribute in some way, we would welcome that experience with you. And then the second thing is we are about to go into the field with our 7th annual nationally representative surveys of parents, teachers, and principals. That's going to be next month. We're in the field, and we're planning on releasing these results before the end of this school year. So this is really meant to be in service of the field. And everybody on this call, we would love to hear your thoughts on what would be most helpful to the field. If you would like to contribute to that, please make your voice heard. Let us know how you would like to contribute to that. Even if it's not something very specific, if it's just directionally some ideas that you have, please let us know when we follow up with you, and then we'll synthesize that again and share it back out. So we're coming to the end, and I am very grateful to all of you who stayed and who joined us here today. I really want to thank the Learning Heroes team. You saw and heard directly from Wendy and Bib, but the whole team was present here today. Howard, Kelsey, Cornelia, Don, Michelle, David, thank you. This was full squad, full team effort. So thank you very much to everybody who joined and participated. And thank you everybody for joining us. And thank you for all the work that you do on behalf of kids. So thanks.